Okay, so demerits have been recently introduced into Alma, with the idea of demerits being actually a way to keep track of overdue loans and actually being able to use an alternative method for using, I don't like the word penalties, but a way to keep track of overdue loans or overdue recalled loans without using the fines method, which is the primary method for doing that. And that is intended to give a solution to areas where there are regulations that limit or constrain the options that the library has in terms of using fines and fees, so that fines and fees cannot be used for any type of penalty, if I still use that word. And instead of that, there's the method of demerits, with the intention being that if the patron accumulates to over a defined threshold of overdue returned loans or overdue returned recalled loans, then if that number passes some defined threshold, the patron may be blocked and not receive further library services for a defined period of time. It's like a penalty system that is used in other areas of our lives, where if you, for example, have too many traffic incidents and the police counts how many times you've done something wrong, and then if you reach some threshold, then you get your license suspended or something like that. That's a method that's also used in some areas, and that's what the demerit is intended to do. It's not a very common method of doing it. The more common way is using the fines and fees. And the way that it's been implemented in Alma is that it may be used irrelevant of whether or not fines are used. I will, in just a moment, go into the Alma screens and actually look at the configurations that are needed for setting up the demerits. And there are quite a number of switches and definitions that have to be turned on in order to put on demerits. What I would like to do is to start by saying that demerits are something that happens behind the scenes, if I can say. You do not see demerits on the screen. You do not see them as list of, like you see fines and fees in a patron's loans. You do not see them in the Patron My Library account. What you do see is blocks, as we'll see in a minute. So just as an introduction, what the system will do is that when the patron reaches some threshold that requires blocking the patron's privileges, a block will be created, and that block will be created with actually an expiry date that will cause the block to go away after a defined period of time. And the way that this will work is that whenever an overdue loan is returned, if the proper definitions that we'll look at in a minute are turned on, Alma will calculate whether the overdue return now is enough to trigger a demerit, and if yes, it will create a block. Let's perhaps look at some definitions, at some configurations, and through that perhaps better understand how demerits will actually work. The first configurations we'll look at are around the fulfillment configuration menu. Going into the configurations menu of fulfillment, we'll see a number of new parameters that have been put in that need to be switched on in order to have demerits working. So I'm going into the configurations menu, the fulfillment configurations menu. And then I'm looking at the other settings option over here. A couple of new parameters have been put in there that must be turned on in order to have demerits work. The first of which is demerit enable. You see here it's set up with false. Of course, where that demerits are needed, this needs to be turned on. Where this is turned on, in other words, true is set up here, this will result in a number of things happening in the system. One, whenever an overdue loan will be an overdue loan will be returned, recalled or not recalled, Alma will trigger the demerits calculation component and look up whether the patron has exceeded the number of allowed overdue loans before a block needs to be created. We'll look at the relevant configurations for doing that in just a minute. In addition to that, Alma will trigger another job that needs to be that we'll look at in just a minute. That will run up over the blocks, over a user's blocks, and see if there are any demerit-caused blocks. If there are demerit-caused blocks, that job will look at whether their expiry has reached and whether these blocks need to be removed based on configurations that we'll look at. So you need to have this true on in order for the demerits to be calculated and the blocks to be created, and in order to have the demerit-caused blocks be removed when their calculated expiry reaches. The other three parameters we have here have to do with how demerits are calculated and how demerit-caused blocks will be removed when their expiry date arrives. First parameter here, you see demerit is 3 days. That actually means how far back the demerit calculation component will look at in order to calculate whether the patron has reached a threshold. The number, for example, 180 here means that whenever an overdue loan is returned, Alma will create the proper demerit. We'll see how Alma calculates how many demerits need to be created. But in addition to that, Alma will look back 180 days back and see the number of demerits that have been created over the last 180 days reaches the threshold that we'll look at so that the patron needs to be calculated. And that takes us on to the next parameter here, the demerit maximum threshold. That is the allowed number of demerits that may be accumulated before a block will be created. So again, if I look at these two parameters, together what they mean is that whenever an overdue loan is returned, Alma will calculate, and that will happen because the true parameter here is set on. Alma will calculate how many demerits need to be created because of this overdue return, and we'll see how that number is calculated in 2 minutes. And then Alma will look back 180 days back and see if within the last 180 days, 5 demerits have been created. If the answer is yes, Alma will create a block, and we'll look at how to define that block in the next couple of minutes. And that block will actually block the patron from placing requests or making loans or whatever we define the block to do, as we'll see. The next parameter here is the demerit suspension date. That means for how long the block will stay intact until it expires. This definition here is saying 5 means that a block will be created for 5 days. Perhaps you want to make it, say, 30, and say that if within 180 days more than 5 demerits have been created, a block will be created for 30 days, meaning for 30 days the patron will be blocked from requests, loans, whatever. We'll look at the configuration in just a minute. So all of these parameters, which are crucial for the demerits component to work, are defined in the same area in the fulfillment general settings, other settings. You'll see that all of them have this demerit prefix here, so they're easy to find. They're all grouped together here. So it's easy to find them and just configure them appropriately. What we haven't seen yet is how the blocks are set up and how the number of thresholds of demerits will be created when an overdue loan is returned. So let's take a look at that. And I'll go back to the fulfillment configuration for this purpose. And have a look at another configuration menu option that has been added here. Excuse me, under the patron configuration. That is the user demerit user demerits menu over here. If you click on that and see what configurations we can do here, this is where we configure actually the number of demerit points that will be created when an overdue loan is returned. You can see that this is actually a mapping table, and that it is defined by user group and material type, so that for each pair of user group plus material type, we can define how many demerit points will be calculated for a regular overdue return, and how many will be created for a recalled overdue return. So for any Burns guest user group that is taking out a book, we will create 12 demerit points for every overdue loan and 13 for every recalled overdue loan. You can see that by the threshold that we have defined in the previous screen, where we defined a threshold of 5, that means actually that every overdue loan will actually cause a block. So perhaps a different configuration may be like this. So that for every overdue loan, there will be 1 demerit point. For every recall, there will be 2. So that if you have within 180 days more than, say, 2 recalled overdue loans and another regular one, then you reach your threshold of 5, and then a block will be created. And so on, this enables creating the rest of the configurations for how many points will be created. What will happen, as I mentioned, is that if the threshold is reached, a block will be created. In order for this block to be created, you have to set up, pre-set up, the demerit blocks within the system. This is the configuration that is available and needs to be pre-set up actually by you, meaning by professional services, so that you have a demerit type of block defined in the system. So what I will be doing now is I will be looking at the relevant code and mapping tables to look, perhaps let's start with the code tables, to look at how to set up a demerit block. So I'm looking right now at the code tables, and this is again relevant for you, professional services for support. This is the menu that is available for you. And if I'm looking at the list of fulfillments code tables in here, we'll see the table that is relevant for setting up blocks. There's a table here for user block description, where the different descriptions that will show up in the blocks list in Alma and in Primo are defined. You can see that there is a code here for demerit with the description demerit. Perhaps you want to use demerit cause block as your description. By this, we've defined a new block, which is actually coded demerit and described as demerit cause block. The next thing that we'll do is we'll go into the mapping table and see how we define the attributes of this block. We've simply defined a new block. We haven't yet defined what this block will do. And for that purpose, we have to look at another table, which is in the mapping tables. So I'm not looking not at the code tables, but rather at mapping tables. I'm again filtering this list to look at the fulfillment relevant mapping tables. And in here, I can see that I have two very important tables that need to be set up. One is the user block definitions, and the other is the block-to-block actions. This is actually what controls the way the blocks behave within Alma. Let's start by looking at the user block definitions table. This defines for every block that we have on our code table, the list of blocks that we just looked at, what exactly are the attributes of this block. So here's where I will define what my demerit block will actually do. So there we go. I see my demerit block here. That's the code that I've created in my code table. So now I can see it in here. And I can define it as a type, a demerit type. This is a new type that has been added in here, in addition to the ones that we've had until now, demerit. This is actually the type that Alma will look for when creating the block when an overdue loan is returned. In other words, you must have a block that is defined with the type demerit, like this is set up in here. And this is the kind of block that Alma will create when an overdue loan is returned and the threshold is reached. The rest here is standard blocks configuration. So there's the description, and there's the description here that we've added into our code table. So I can add a description here. This is where I set up whether the block will be overridable by all, non-overridable at all, overridable by circulation desk manager or by a simple operator as well. And this is standard configuration for blocks. And the next section here will be what action will be blocked by this. Currently, there are two options here, 0, 1 or 0, 2. And the next table that we'll look at will define what this 0, 1 means. That table will say, for example, 0, 1 means blocked from loan and from requests. 0, 2 means blocked from loans but not from requests, and so on. So these are codes that we'll look at just in a minute how they are defined. And they will control what actions are blocked by this block. So just let's have a look at that table. And that's the other table that we saw on the list that we just looked at, the block-to-block actions. So let's go back to the list. And that's this table, the block-to-block actions. I'm going into this table, and you can see these are the two codes, and you can, of course, add additional codes in here. And you can see that in this sample setup here, there's no difference between the 0, 1 and 0, 2. They all mean that a patron that has this block will be blocked from loan, from renew, and from hold. Of course, I can create an additional one, 0, 3, to say that the action here will be renew. Actually, I should put it as block action 1, renew, and say loan, and that's it. Just add this row, and this will mean that I have a new option to set up blocks that will not cause blocking requests. Anything that I set up with 3 will mean requests are not blocked. Likewise, I can create another one and say hold like this, 0, 4, and add this to my list. And now I have more options with regard to what my blocks will do in the system. I can set up blocks that will pretty much block everything, loan, renew, and hold. I can create blocks that only block renew and loan, and I can create blocks that only block hold requests. So I want to go back to the table that we looked at before, the user block definitions one, which is very crucial to understand. This is actually where definitions, block definitions are set up, meaning what this block will do. This is where it is set up. You must set up a block type demerit here. Otherwise, none of this will work. The description is what you will see when the block is created, what you will see on your block list. Overridable means how the circulation desk operator will be able to override a block, yes or no, or what role is required for this. And this is where you will set up what this will block. So I can say demerit blocks will only block requests, or I can say demerit blocks will block loans and renewals, but not block requests, whatever the library policy will be. This is where you set it up. So to sum this up, before we look at just another important thing to know, is that how demerit will work. It actually, as you see, fits into the standard Alma blocks management component, so that whenever an overdue loan is returned and the proper switches are turned on, Alma will create demerit points based on configuration per user group and per material type, look back into the return history of that patron for the number of days that have been defined and see if the defined threshold has been reached. And if that indeed has happened, then a block will be created, and the block will be created according to the definitions that you've just seen. It will be a persistent block that you will be able to see on the user's blocks, so that if I pull up some user record, if the threshold has reached and a block is created, by just looking at this patron, at the patron's block list, I will see a new block, which is now available just because I've defined my block's configuration properly, and that's the demerit cause block. Now, the blocks that will be created here will include information about what barcodes have caused this block. So in the block node, you'll see information about what has actually caused this demerits, list of barcodes. So you'll be able to give some auditing as to what caused this demerit to come about. Of course, Alma will mark these loans as have been used for calculating a demerit again, so that they will not create another demerit or when another overdue loan will happen. So what will happen now is, in this example, you see one demerit block that is created. This demerit block will cause the relevant blocks as we've defined. If the patron continues to return loans overdue, faster time, or recalled overdue loans, every such return will continue to activate the same exact process that I've just described. So again, Alma will look back at all of the demerits, all of the overdue loans that have been returned and have not yet triggered a demerit. And if those accumulate to the relevant threshold again, another block will be created. Now the blocks are created with a creation date. And this enables another job that we look at that looks up these blocks, the demerit blocks, and removes them if the suspension days that we've defined have reached. So if we've defined 30 in the fulfillment configuration, that means that this block will be removed 30 days from now, beginning of December. If next week the patron again reaches the 5 demerit point threshold, another block will be created, and that block will have a creation date of November 11th. So that block will expire only when 30 days pass, starting from November 11th. So a patron may have more than one demerit block. Each one of them has its own date, so that the job knows to remove the block after the number of days have reached. So the patron can continually extend the block date if he continues to accumulate overdue loans and continually pass the threshold that has been defined. The job that does this block suspension is a job that may be monitored like any other job. But I'm looking at the monitor job, and you see that some changes have been done here in this November release, moving the monitor option to a different menu. But the rest is pretty much the same. I'm just looking at the list of jobs that exist here in the system. Perhaps filter this to look at the fulfillment relevant jobs. Then we can see a job here to remove demerit blocks. This, of course, needs to be on. This is the job that will deactivate the block when my defined period of time is reached. You must make sure that this is on. As you can see, currently this is set up for a weekly. This is going to change soon, so that by the time this is released with the release, I hope this will actually be changed to a daily schedule, meaning that blocks will be indeed expired on the day and exact date that that their expiry date is reached by the relevant configurations. So what the patron will see, as long as demerits accumulate and have not reached their threshold yet, what the patron will see is nothing. The demerits that have accumulated will not show up on the my account, will not show up on the fines list in the circulation desk. There's actually in the UI no trace of the fact that you have overdue loans that have such and such demerits, and that if you continue, you will get a block. Until the block is created, there's no trace of the fact that there are accumulated demerits in the system. This is somewhat less than perhaps what was possible in other systems, in Voyager, but only when the block is created, then it will show up. It will show up in the list of blocks that we've seen in the user record. It will show up in the list of blocks that show up in Primo. It will have this type of demerit, and there will be information about the items that have triggered this demerit. And again, the block will be removed when this job finds the expiry date has reached. That's what has been developed. That's what we'll see on the November release.
Thank you very much.